Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 13th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1940. John Ford arrived with an epic adaptation of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel The Grapes of Wrath. The ensemble film starring Henry Fonda was a hit with critics and audiences and went on to earn 7 Oscar nominations. On Oscar night, it took home the prizes for Best Supporting Actress and Best Director. But it was Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca that took home Best Picture at the end. So why did The Grapes of Wrath come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to The Grapes of Wrath. Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, and we have reached 1940. It's been 80 years, and we're talking about 80-year-old movies at this point. So very soon I will be getting into the 30s and then a little bit in the 20s, and who knows after that. Dun dun dun. And I have a very special guest with me to talk about a very special movie. You first heard him on the Pulp Fiction episode for 1994 and the Sayonara episode for 1957. He did an episode of On Second Thought about Inglourious Bastards. From InSession Film, host of Chasing the Gold, the podcast. Please welcome back to the show, Ryan McQuade.
Hi, Kevin. How's it going?
It's going good. Are you excited to talk about 80-year-old movies with me?
I cannot wait to talk about 80-year-old movies with you. It's a clean round number, too. 80 right down the middle. It's perfect. I love it. 80-year anniversaries for all of these movies. Everybody gets a new Blu-ray box office release or whatever. Well, not box office, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes. Well, we are talking about The Grapes of Wrath today as the runner-up that lost Best Picture to Rebecca. So I'm very excited to talk about those two movies as well as most of the other Best Picture nominees because I do like this batch a whole lot more than the 1941 Best Picture nominees. So that is always a good thing. So are we ready to jump in?
Absolutely.
Okay, quick summary of the film. It's an adaptation of the John Steinbeck novel of the same name. It's about the Joad family who are struggling through the Great Depression in the 30s, who lose their farm and go on a trek to California in their truck. And along the way, they encounter several people who are also struggling. They bump up against the systems that are put in place that very much disadvantage the working class and just do their best to strive onward and keep hope alive. And the film was directed by John Ford and written by Nunnally Johnson. It stars Henry Fonda as Tom, Jane Darwell as Ma, John Carradine, Shirley Mills, John Quaylen, Eddie Quillen, and a whole lot more. Big ensemble film. And The Grapes of Wrath made $2.5 million at the box office, and it was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, winning 2, including Director, but not Best Picture. So, Ryan, tell me your thoughts on The Grapes of Wrath.
Well, I think before you even get into the film, Kevin, I think I have to take you back to my adolescence in middle school, high school. I know. Yeah, we gotta go back to the past.
Relive
We're going
those
back
days.
to the past 80 years. Might as go back, 10, 12 year, whatever it is in my life. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I feel that you and I are of that generation, and a lot of people that are our age are of the generation where The Grapes of Wrath was the required reading for a certain summer of our lives for school. Mm-hmm. It was like, you're going to read this depressing epic in the middle of your fun summer, and then you're going to come back. And for me, at least, it was talk about this book for 9 straight weeks in English class. And I don't know about you, that could literally tarnish any book for any human being in the world. Name your favorite book. After 9 weeks of talking about it, and I'm not saying Grapes of Wrath is my favorite book, I'm just using that as an example, you might get sick of that book and wouldn't want to pick it up for a long time.
Right.
And I think that that's the case I had with the Grapes of Wrath and the movie Grapes of Wrath as well. I saw this in school, and I was at a point where if I have to hear about the Joad family again, I am going to scream. And I couldn't take it anymore. Like, I get it. It's sad and it's depressing. And so right from the get-go, I was not in the right mind frame to watch a movie. I think you should go into a movie clean slate, like most of us do when in normal times we go to theaters, or when we're watching them at home, and just kind of go in even keeled, ready to go to watch it. And I was not at the time, and I hated the movie because I was just tired of this property. So when you asked me to come on, it was like, the Grapes of Wrath, I gotta remember all those memories. And I put it on and I watched it, and wow. I mean, just what time does to you as a human being can change your opinion on any movie. Like a movie that you hated many years ago, you could end up falling in love with, or it attaches to you in a different thing with maturity. And I think with the Grapes of Wrath, for me, this movie is not what I remembered it being at all. It is a wonderful classic that is extremely depressing, that is very timely. It's still timely right now. We live in a time right now, Kevin, where 40 plus million people are unemployed. There is uncertainty because of a pandemic. We have so many things around this world, in this country, up in the air due to lack of leadership and lack of direction as a country as a whole. And we're scared, and people are scared, not only for their jobs, but for their lives and their families. And I think the Grapes of Wrath tackles a lot of that in the 1940s, and you can carry that 80 years later. It's extremely well directed. I mean, John Ford is a wonderful director in general, but there are shots in this movie that, for at the time an $800,000 budget, is extraordinarily up to date and timely as well. They are so crisp and clean within a movie that is basically about the dirt, and you feel the grime of the film as it's going, and as they keep trying to find places of prosperity and stability. It feels like the dirt and the sweat and the tears and the blood in a black and white movie. You feel those moistures coming onto the screen. And it's led by Henry Fonda, who is wonderful and tragic in this movie, and Jane Darwell, who is, really good. We'll talk about her, obviously. We'll talk about this cast. Ultimately, I think what the Grapes of Wrath movie rewatch for your show, Kevin, has made me want to do is go buy a copy of this book and read it again, and not talk about it for 9 weeks. God, that would be crazy. But I don't know who would want to hear that sermon. But I think it makes me want to reevaluate this Steinbeck novel, because the movie and the book are very similar from what I did remember way back when. There's some differences, and we could talk about that if you wanted to. Yeah. But ultimately, this movie is a movie of the time, and it's a movie that still moves us forward in conversations now, because I think through everything, we are a country that does not learn, and we always are doomed to repeat ourselves. And so in troubling times, a movie like The Grapes of Wrath gets heightened above times when we're in a better place. And right now, for me, this movie is a classic.
Well, I'm glad that it could have that effect on you. That's amazing. I have certainly had that happen to me as well, and that is quite kind of like a startling thing, to just watch something with different eyes a few years later and be like, wow, okay. But still feel like in the past you value like that reaction you had, but now as you're older, having an appreciation for it, maybe that low expectations that you had going in made it more impressive to you. So that's kind of cool. I kind of had a similar arc, I suppose, as far as The Grapes of Wrath really did always kind of feel like a property that was homework and not necessarily something to be enjoyed or even find much value in as like a high schooler. It was tough for me to really wrap my head around just their struggle and contextualizing it. But certainly in the time we're living in, as you have alluded to, I do think that it takes on even more of a profound emotion for me watching it again. And I think what is so affecting about it is that it is epic in the story that it's trying to tell about this family that's set during the Great Depression, which is a big thing to sort of tackle, but it's also very intimate in just how it is about this one family and their relationships and how that comes to be this story that represents thousands of families during that time. And it is a somewhat sprawling ensemble we have here, but I think that John Ford and the filmmakers and the screenwriter, Nunnally Johnson, they all, I think, make the right call as far as centering that core relationship of Tom and his mother. Mm-hmm. Every scene of Henry Fonda and Jane Darwell together, I think, is so lived in and profoundly emotional, and you totally believe that they're cut from the same cloth. And it's interesting because when this film comes out, and the book comes out only a year before this, which is a very fast turnaround.
Yeah, it was.
People are still feeling the effects of the Great Depression, so it's incredibly timely. But it's also getting into some interesting territory that I'm sure ruffled some feathers as far as, the workers banding together and essentially forming unions to protect themselves. And Tom's whole speech at the end about sticking up for the little guy against cops, against these oppressive systems that were actually partly responsible for this whole thing. And to me, very little of that comes across as too preachy or that the message is overshadowing what's happening with the characters in this film, even though I think it is an inherently political film. Mm-hmm. I think it does so in a way that is just, it's just demonstrating what people's lives were like in the wake of this horrible incident. And to me, it's the kind of thing where it's like, how can you not have a deep sympathy for all of these farmers who got displaced from their homes and not want to try to do something about it? So I think it's a very inspiring film at the end of the day. And I think it's about as good an adaptation of like a classic American novel that I've seen, right up there with like To Kill a Mockingbird, because it's its own thing, even though it's taking a lot of, obviously it has to adapt the story. I think it exists as its own artistic piece that is somewhat different from the novel, at least in terms of changing around the ending a bit, making it a little more inspiring.
Well, I think what's also interesting is the people telling this story and telling Steinbeck's words onto the screen. The book, if you remember, Kevin, and even the kind of the subject matter that we see in the film, they're more of the time of left-wing politics, the forming of unions, the idea of the little man, that these big systems cannot control us. I mean, that sounds very eerily similar to what is going on right now. And yet they are told by one of the more politically conservative directors of all time in John Ford. I mean, look at John Ford's films. He is the macho man's director, it feels like. And yet I think that this, along with maybe like The Quiet Man, might be his most vulnerable film and most stripped down film of his sort of bravado that we see throughout his Westerns and his work with John Wayne. Because I think that he is diving deep into the American humanity and possibly even looking at the hypocrisies of his own party's logic when it comes to the working class people. I think that ultimately this movie is very political because it's about the people versus the system and the people versus this country and survival. Survival is very much a political thing, whether it's with power or whether it's within politicians going and, door to door in smaller places around this country to try to grab their vote and promise them that their mills will be fine or their farms will still work, that they don't have to move to the big cities in order to have prosperity. And I think that, it's interesting that the film is, and the book is centered around Tom Joad, a man that was in prison and is detached
for
from
homicide.
His family. For homicide. The way
I love that line delivery.
Which is, just great delivery.
Yes.
But
go on.
And he's separated from his family, and yet his mom and everyone around him, when he comes back in, it's effortlessly transitioned back into as one of them, right? He's not really an outsider near as much here, I think, early on as you would think he would be. But as the film progresses and they go from these camps to camps, you can tell that he is not like the rest of them. He is questioning everything and every decision and wondering why this has to be the way it is, why hundreds of thousands of families have to go all the way out to one state and fight over a handful of jobs and think that that is the right thing to do, and that's the American way, and leave their homes and leave their properties. I mean, I think when I first read this was in 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. So it was post the 2008 Recession. Financial crisis, right? Yeah. And for me, I guess, I wasn't, I guess, politically as in tuned at the time, and it didn't hit me as much. But for a lot of people, it did. And the story resonates then, and like I said, it resonates now. But Tom is just an interesting character that by the end, he is going to be this journeyman, right? And he's going to go from town to town, and he says, if you hear about this injustice going on here, or you hear about these people that are given more than what that they were promised, that when you look to those places, Mom, that's where you'll know I'll be. I'm going to make a difference beyond just helping my family and everything. And it's a powerful scene. It's I think, second best scene in the film. I think the first best scene is the handbill scene when they are on their way to California and everyone around them pulls out their handbills. And the guy that's there is telling them those handbills are worthless. How many times nowadays do you apply for a job and you have no idea how many other people have applied for that thing? And you are hoping and praying because you've read that job description, Kevin, and you've gone, that's the perfect job for me. And you start planning out your life based off that job, right? And it is the ultimate thing of hundreds of thousands of people could apply for that job. And there is no guarantee that it's going to be given to you. You're going to have to work for it. And you are basically applying and going into the unknown. That's what the Joad family really are doing by going to California. It is that vast unknown. And it's not easy. And if you want to have that experience, if you want to feel that experience, talk to people that lost their houses, talk to people that are, going to be kicked out of their homes right now due to, not having enough for rent. The scenes with Ma and feeding those kids. Think about your food banks that are going on right now that don't have enough people to sort food. And then people, there's those long lines you see on the internet, right? Mm-hmm. You get all that contextualized within this film about a family struggling as families are struggling. It's deeply heartbreaking. And I had to pause the movie at times, Kevin, because it was just getting to me in ways that, I couldn't even imagine, because I was sitting there. I was like, how could I have not known or remembered it being this poetic at times too? Like, it's a very, it's very poetic and touching, and also very disturbing that it's still relevant. I don't want it to be relevant. I want our world and everybody to be able to survive, but that's just never how it's going to be with so many people in this country.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like the same thing people are saying right now with Watchmen being so relevant. It's like, I wish this was not so timely. Like, this is not a good thing that it is so relevant. But yeah, I mean, there's this interesting dimension to the film also of Jim Casey, played by John Carradine, who used to be a preacher, and he tags along with the Joad family, and he has a very haunted look to him, like he's just been through the ringer spiritually and emotionally, but he still wants to advocate and fight for people, as we see later on, where they're at a camp and the people in charge are not willing to pay them what they said they would because there's just too many of them. And he is also very instrumental, I think, to Tom's journey, to where I think Tom in the beginning is a little unsure about some of his philosophies there, but later really he comes to embody many of them. So I think it's important to highlight his contribution to this, and I think John Carradine is so good, like I said, just physically, of suggesting everything that he has been through.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like that idea, Kevin, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but
no, go ahead.
There is, I find Casey's character interesting also because it's the lack of faith that's in, why he's become an ex-preacher now. No, he's lost it. He talks about that he's lost it.
Yeah.
And usually in a lot of films, and even probably something along the lines of Ford's thinking, you would think that by the end of this film, this man would have turned back to faith, right? Or he'd be continuing to say, well, I've lost everything, but you got to keep the faith. God will take care of us and all.
Yeah.
That's not the case for that character. That character has realized that the only way to really have fundamental change isn't to pray on it, isn't to wish upon a star, to use another movie from this year.
Yes.
Is to go out and do something about it. Sitting and waiting's not going to solve it. And
thoughts and prayers are not enough.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking when I was like, this is about pulling on your bootstraps and getting out there and getting the job done for you and your community. And so sitting around keyboards nowadays isn't even good enough. Like I think about, what's happened this summer with the Black Lives Matter movement. Putting up a black square on your Instagram page is not enough.
That's enough activism for today.
Yeah, it's not. You need to go and march in those streets. You need to vote. You need to have, real change that can affect things in this world. That's what Jim Casey does by the end of it. Instead of just, he travels with his family, he gets separated, but when they find him again, he is leading these people on what is fair, what is right, what is the human thing to do. And that to me, I found really profound.
Yeah. And like I said, I just think that John Carradine really is the perfect person for this kind of a role, because he has that melancholy about him and that lived in experience, and you can just see it all on his face. And yeah, I mean, I think he was a little bit robbed of a supporting actor nomination, because every time he was on screen, I was just riveted by just the way he was carrying himself, I guess. So, I mean, we can obviously definitely talk about Jane Darwell here also in terms of acting. I just want to praise her to the high heavens for this performance, because that is one thing that I did see this movie way back in the day, like you did, and had some mixed feelings on it. But one thing that has always stayed in my mind as a positive about this film is Jane Darwell, because she is honestly one of the best depictions of motherhood and patience and inner strength that I have seen in this kind of a mother role on film, period. And I think she is helped by also the cinematography, which really highlights her face so brilliantly, I think, and just the sorrow in her eyes. And there's this scene towards the beginning where she's packing things up and burning some things and throwing things out, and it's like she's just remembering the past, remembering her youth, and she just breaks your heart. she breaks my heart. And like I said, every time her and Henry Fonda are together, and she just has that way of speaking that is so familiar to me, even though I didn't grow up in the South. It's that like sense of that she has been through so much, so much, and she is just pressing onward and enduring, and that's very much dictated in that final speech that she gives that closes out the film, of just she will survive, she will press onward no matter what comes her way, and she will always protect her family, and she will give them the dignity that they deserve when it comes to actually burying some people who die along the way. And I'm just so moved by that performance every time I think about it. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I love it. I agree with you. It is
Okay.
it is a wonderful performance. I mean, it's the little things, right, Kevin, in the
Yeah, yeah.
performance that I think, when Tom comes home and she's serving everyone and she sees him just like kind of outside looking at a tree, her facial expression says more than what actually the dialogue suggests. In that they are about to leave on this trip. She sees her son come home and she realizes her family is complete again. Like they're all going to be together, and she doesn't have to worry about, somebody getting a message out to him when he comes out and everything. It truly feels like someone that is just bona fide happy that she knows everyone's going to be safe and around her. Then she's this ultimate caregiver to, obviously, the grandmother, and when she passes, and you mentioned that, and it's just this ultimate caregiver that is the bedrock of a family that is extremely low. And there are times where she could be negative, or everyone else is around her negative. Like when they go to one of the campsites and they put them in this shack, and it is super small for the amount of people that they are going to be in there. And she is sweeping, and she says, "We are going to make do with what we have, and we will find a way." And then there is she has the two big scenes, which is when they arrive at the first camp, I believe, and they start, cooking up some food for everyone in the Jode family. And there's these kids that look absolutely starving, like they haven't seen meals in weeks because their parents aren't working. And how she goes, "They're breaking my heart." And it is her motherly instinct, her human instinct to want to take care of these people. You know what I mean? It is not something that she, anybody at that time could have just been like, "Get out of here. I don't want to deal with you, blah, blah, blah." She finally gives in because she's like, what if it was my family? What if I wasn't able to provide and they had to go around and beg? And it could be just something small. And it almost feels like she gives up I think she does almost give up her portion for these kids. It's the ultimate sacrifice. You talk about it. And throughout this entire film, you see her harden. She is very innocent at the beginning of it, and she hardens. And then there's that line at the end where, "I ain't never going to be scared no more." She is just like her son by the end, in that she sees that this is going to be tough and I have to harden, and maybe not harden to my family, but to everyone else around me. And it is a impeccably done performance that, like you said, when they are together, I mean, there's obviously the Tom Josie, but there's that dance sequence that they're, dancing together, and it just feels like this is a breath of fresh air that the family can breathe for just a couple of scenes in a movie where they can't breathe. And it's those two characters we end up focusing on more in that dance sequence than just about any of the other family members. They are the true driving force of the message of this movie, and they also are very much alike, and that's what's so interesting and special about it as well.
Yes. And I guess this is a little skipping around a bit, but just speaking to the
we're
ending.
Moving everywhere.
I was going to speak to the ending a little bit, and how I think it reinforces how the two of them are very similar in what they think is right and what they know is right instinctively. Like, she instinctively knows she wants to help these kids, even though she has never met them before. And I think it shows in his speech how he wants to go and help anyone who's been beaten down. And then her speech at the end, where she talks about just pressing onward and knowing that there's going to be rich people that come in who prop up and do their thing, but that they'll die out, and that she will always, and her family and this whole generation will press onward. They will survive. They will outlast all of these people. And I think the two of them contrasting, I think they have different styles in what they like, kind of how they will minister that feeling, I guess, but that both are valid. And what's so wild is that this whole ending with her speech is completely invented and was not even in the book. Yeah. And that John Ford didn't even direct this final sequence. It was Selznick, the producer, who came in and said, we should have a little bit more of a happier ending here, because we can't just have like Tom Joad walking off into the sunset or whatever. And actually it's like nighttime when this happens. And then that's it. Because then, like, what's the big inspiring thing here? But anyway, I think it's just an interesting sort of contrast how, like I said, they are so similar, but that they will go onward in their lives in different ways, and that she doesn't always have to be the person who's, like, out there as a leader type, like Tom Joad might be, but she could still have value. So I really appreciate the ending, as invented as it is, for that.
But it just drives home the point of the film, and it does end it, I think, on a more hopeful note than it's a hardened but hopeful note. And I think that that's okay. Like, their adaptations, they don't have to be 100% like beholden to the book. There are movies you've talked about on your show. I always think about There Will Be Blood as a perfect example. The ideas of that book are there, but none of those characters are in oil, So this is a very, faithful adaptation, like we've said. But to add something like that too, it doesn't make you want to go out of the theater and not have hope. I think Steinbeck doesn't know if they're going to have hope yet, because it's written a year before this picture is released, and they're even more coming out of it than anything. And so I think also too, like, that's the real driving force around a lot of movies from this year is hope, because we are coming out of the Depression. We're going into what we might be going pretty much close into a war, and Hollywood's job is to provide entertainment, but to also provide escapism from the hardships of the world. And even though this film is not escaping the world that we know, it's still doing the best it can to not just make you walk out of there and want to cry and never see this thing again. Right. It's doing a good job with that speech, and man, it's a wonderful monologue to end on. Like, it really just is, and she delivers it beautifully.
Yeah. And looking at the trajectory of the film, actually speaking to kind of leaving it on that high note, I do think it's interesting because the book has a different sort of structure as far as the different camps that they go to.
Yeah.
Because they start off at the camp that is from the government, from the Department of Agriculture, and it's the most positive sort of experience that they have, which is towards the end of this movie. So it's kind of like structured backwards as far as what the book does, because the book is just like, we're starting off at this Department of Agriculture camp and things are solid, not great, but could be worse. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse as it goes on. And then it's just leaving you with that sense of hopelessness. And it does have that Tom speech, at the same time, but it's still like, I think the way they wanted to structure the film is that they have reached the bottom at the beginning of this film where they have to move, and bad things keep happening along the way, but there is still a sense of rising positive action and I think that, I guess, provides a better film experience, not even factoring in the year that it came out, but especially so in the year that it came out, that I understand why they would want to structure it that way instead. And it's still, it becomes its own thing, like I was saying at the beginning of this is the book version, this is the movie version, and both versions of the story have the same characters and the same general feeling to them, but they are different animals, and both are valid. I honestly think the movie might be better than the book, but I haven't read the book in a long time, so I can't speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was like, man, I kind of want to reread the book.
Yeah.
But I think it works either way, because even their positive experience, it's not 100% positive. It is like the best circumstance that they can have, especially in the movie, given what they've gone through.
Yeah.
So I think it works like this in the film better than in the book, because then the book does leave you on more, I guess, realistic but also depressing note. And it does heighten the tension a little bit more with Tom. I think they have to enter that in more as the film goes on, because I mean, at the height of when he's in danger is like in the first or second camp, right?
Right.
And they're able to escape, and then they go to this one and they're laid low for a while, but then of course, it catches up to him. And I think that he's just had enough of it, and by the end, he goes off and to hopefully do the right thing. We've seen he does have a temper. His temper can get the best of him, and you hope that it doesn't. I mean, that goes back to the idea of hope, is that you hope this Joad family is going to be okay, and then you hope Tom can get out of his own way in order to truly help people, just like Jim, can and was. And Jim Casey's more of an even keel kind of guy. Tom feels more like trying to be, I guess, a revolutionary in helping out everyone. And that is, I'm telling you, that's such a liberal idea coming from John Ford of all people. It's crazy. And it provides this wonderful sort of, I guess, partisan way of looking at this story in the world. It's wild, Kevin. It's wild that I didn't remember it being, because you get this impression from John Ford that he is just so tough as nails, and like I said, the movie is very sensitive at times and very understanding, and it's a very human level story, and that's what I love about it the most.
Yeah. The hero of this John Ford story is a social justice warrior. I mean, let's just say it. Like, that's what that whole speech is like, he's going to go out and actually fight for social justice. Yeah. So I think that's kind of amazing. Yeah. I just want to jump around to a few scenes, since we're talking a lot about the ending, because it's so impactful and powerful that I can't not focus on it. But I do think it's interesting seeing, like, any comments that are made along the way of judgment towards these people, the Okies, as they call them. Yeah. There's a scene at the gas station, I think, where people are working there, or saying stuff like they just don't know any better than to live like they are, stuff like that. And
like
there's this
trash.
whole right.
It's like, it's like, no, we're all the same here, and yet they're treating them like they're they're inferior to them. I guess that's the better way of saying it. Like, they feel like they're above them, and it's like, you've probably been in this situation before. Everyone has.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of kind of like the whole rhetoric of people who try to immigrate to America, of like taking this long trek and doing it in the way that they do, and people just judge them for it. And it's like, if it was your family, wouldn't you do anything in hell or high water to get them to a better place, this hopeful place, So that's another layer, I think, that makes it so relevant, sadly.
Yeah. One of my favorite scenes is the diner sequence. I think it's like a diner. Yep. And, we don't actually get the vantage point of the Joad family in this. We actually cut to this these workers and
Mm-hmm.
this waitress and this cook, and kind of go through a well functioning place that even probably the Jodes came from,
Yep.
and that they're doing fine. It looks like they're doing fine and everything. And the Jode family come in, and it is such an interesting, because it's such an interesting scene because they just basically ask for a loaf of bread. They only have enough based off of their money rations, and the waitress is very by the book, and yet the cook is like, just give him the loaf of bread, like just give it to him. You don't even have to, what I mean, just give it to him. And then they ask about the candies because the two kids are in there because they were looking at them, and I think they're like what are they, like a dime or a nickel a piece,
Mm-hmm.
and she sells them for two for a penny.
Yeah.
And it's like what you're saying. They're all giving them this look of inferiority,
Judgment.
and
Yeah.
judgment, just completely like, what trash, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet real humanity behind that is those guys that are the workers. They pay enough to not only cover their meals, but to cover the loss of every single cent that the Jode family couldn't afford for the things that they needed. And it is that idealism that, even though, yeah, you look upon them and you judge them or whatever, we can still be human beings. We can still be good people. And they see through the waitress who was reluctant at first. They see through her act of kindness. They perform an act of kindness. And it is this really good thing. It's like, if we all just work together, we're going to be okay. We're all going to get fed. We're all going to be able to live. And
Right.
if we just are nicer and do an act of kindness, I mean, nowadays it's donating, or it's, giving not just your money, but your time. I think time is an ultimate thing you can give somebody right now, given everything going on. And yet these people back then, I mean, it was a lot more money because you had a lot of time on your hands back then, and these people just do that act of kindness, and it just provides humanity to a movie that could be like you're saying, those little scenes, it's devoid of it. And it shows that, people can be good if you put in the effort.
That's what it is. Absolutely. Yeah. And also just the whole idea of when they mention anything to do with like communism, there's certainly like references to that when people are talking about Reds. And Tom Joad is like, everyone's always talking about Reds, and he doesn't really know what that is, which is kind of fun. But I do think they do sort of tone down any of that sort of stuff from the book as far as fleshing that out and presenting that as like an alternative situation, which I understand, obviously, for many reasons in 1940. But I did find that interesting, the way they sort of talked about people who are agitators who are trying to really disrupt the system. So like, there's so many little added things in here that, yes, it is about this family and their struggles, but it fills in the gaps and sort of presents what the general feeling was of how people are struggling completely through this situation, and yet there will still be people who are so judgmental, who are saying, well, we can't go too far with helping people, or this and this might happen. So I find all of that to be really very interesting.
I love the swimming sequence. I think that's it's another just moment of just clarity. I mean, but it's also like, it's a moment of happiness. I feel like this time we talk about in history, it's just very serious. It's very dark, depression,
Right.
moving out and everything. And the idea of just like a family going into a bed of water and swimming for an hour or 30 minutes or whatever it may be to escape the onslaught of depressing things that are going to happen in the second half of this film. It's like a nice little thing in the middle of it too, and it's so well shot. I mean, that's like the thing about this movie, is Ford's lens and just being able to sit a camera and just observe. I feel like at times Ford is an observer of these people and just of this world at times, just really getting into a family trying to survive, and that camera sits still so many places. And We didn't even, I don't, like Muley's house too. Like they're just the beginning of the film, we
Yeah.
meet Muley and it's right before, like they're all like, he's had it worse than even the Jones family. And just like the shots of Muley in the dirt and angry about having to leave it. And then it's the same thing that grandpa has to face at the end, like, this is my dirt, this is my land, and the reluctancy to want to leave because not thinking it's fair, right? It's not fair that these big banks and these people are moving them out of country to a place that's even more inhabited than they are now, and the conditions are horrible, and you feel everything within just little close-ups from forward of dirt in their hands to just sitting a camera still and having actors express pain, and angst. And I mean, I think this is his best directed film. Like, I know people are going to say The Searchers, and I know that people will say Stagecoach and Quiet Man. I mean, he's got a long career, Kevin, of great
Yes,
things.
I'm aware.
But I think,
yes.
I know you are. But I just
talked about quite a few of them already. Yeah.
Yes. But I just think, to me, I think this is the most personal. I think this is the most personal.
This and The Quiet Man, I think, is personal too. And yeah, I love when he gets into this mode. And by the way, cinematography by Greg Toland. We just talked about him on Citizen Kane. Yes. Obviously one of the best of all time in that regard. But yeah, and just thinking about those scenes where he does sort of just let people navigate a scene, like when Grandpa is talking about how, like, yeah, this is just dirt and maybe it's not much, but it's my dirt. Yeah. I mean, and the camera is so friendly to every actor in this, I think. I mean, on a technical level, like I was saying in the beginning, it is both epic and intimate at the same time. So, do you have any other stray observations before we get into the Oscars?
No, I mean, there is the stuff with Noah and Connie.
Yes. That
that happens, and some of the smaller family members in the film that I just I wish the film was a little more fleshed out for their vantage point. I feel like we got to know Ma and Tom, and even I got to know Jim Casey more at times in this film.
I mean, those are the three. Yeah,
those are like the three, and I didn't get to really. We don't really get to see a lot more of the family except just as a group in general. Right. I mean, even Pa gets the scene with the kids in the diner. You know what I mean? Right. But I wish there was a little bit more with them, and I think that's just a small complaint. It's like it is when you have giant ensembles. There are going to be some people in the background. But no, I just, other than that, I don't think that there's really any other complaints. I just think that it's just such a well-made film.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for bringing that up too, because I agree. I think that the book certainly fleshes it out more as a family, as an ensemble. Again, from what I can remember, and from also what people have said in reviews, is that it really is kind of just like Tom and Ma with an extra side, with a side of Jim Casey. But that's a minor complaint, because I really do think that key relationship there, that core, is what makes the film so successful, and that if it was too divergent into telling too many stories, then it might get a little muddled. I don't know. So I think they focused on the right characters to tell a very emotional story, and I highly recommend this if you have not seen it before. If you maybe saw it a long time ago in class and you were like, this is boring, then watch it with new eyes in 2020 and see what you think, because I don't think it is just homework and that does not have value. I think it's incredibly relevant in ways that are upsetting, but is still just a deeply emotional journey to take with this one family, and highly recommend it. So with that, when we come back, we will be talking about why The Grapes of Wrath lost Best Picture to Rebecca.
Sweeping across the country, comes one of the great literary achievements of our time. A human, revealing, soul-stirring story that instantly becomes the most discussed novel of modern literature, The Grapes of Wrath.
The Grapes of Wrath, please.
I'll have to put you on the waiting list. We've never had such a demand for a book. Do you have a copy of Grapes of Wrath?
Sorry, we're all sold out.
Yes, The Grapes of Wrath. Well, send me as many copies as you can. I can't supply the demand.
The Grapes of Wrath.
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 Grapes of Wrath. As sales skyrocket, The Grapes of Wrath becomes the book of the nation. Everyone, everywhere, joins in the discussion of its vital problems. Due to this unprecedented popularity, producers vie for the motion picture rights. And finally, 20th Century Fox announces the purchase of the book and plans for its immediate production. A storm of discussion arouses the nation. Speculation and rumor are rife to the effect that no producer will venture to film this great dramatic masterpiece of human hearts. Darrell F. Zanuck, production head of 20th Century Fox Studios, emphatically announces that The Grapes of Wrath will be made. All of the resources of this vast studio are marshaled for the production. John Ford, Academy Award winner, is given the directorial assignment. The cast is carefully chosen to make John Steinbeck's unforgettable characters come to life. Tom Joad is played by Henry Fonda. Maud Joad is played by Jane Darwell. Casey is played by John Carradine. Grandpa is played by Charlie Greatwind. Rosa Sharon is played by Doris Bowden. Paul Joad is played by Russell Simpson. Al is played by O.Z. Whitehead. Muley is played by John Quaylen. Connie is played by Eddie Quillen. And now, at last, The Grapes of Wrath is ready for the screen as the motion picture captures all the drama, suspense, action, tears and laughter of the story that stirred a nation.
Do you have a copy of Grapes of Wrath?
Sorry, we're all sold out.
Yes, The Grapes of Wrath. Well, send me as many copies as you can. I can't supply the demand.
And we're back. So now we will be discussing why The Grapes of Wrath lost Best Picture to Rebecca. And The Grapes of Wrath was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director for John Ford, Best Actor for Henry Fonda, Best Supporting Actress for Jane Darwell, Best Screenplay, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound Recording. And it won Best Director and Best Supporting Actress, 2 big above-the-line wins there. And before the Oscars, The Grapes of Wrath won Best Picture at the New York Film Critics and the National Board of Review. And as far as precursors, that's all we got in 1940. So by all accounts, we could say that The Grapes of Wrath maybe went into this as something of a frontrunner, despite the fact that Rebecca got 11 nominations and The Grapes of Wrath got 7. I do think this was a race. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on why you think Rebecca was our Best Picture winner and not The Grapes of Wrath.
Okay, so a couple reasons why The Grapes of Wrath lost to Rebecca has to actually possibly do nothing with The Grapes of Wrath. It has to do with the 2 people working on Rebecca, which are the director, Alfred Hitchcock, and the producer, of course, David O. Selznick.
Right.
So more than Selznick, who I'll get to in a second. Hitchcock is, this is early in his career, Kevin. He's mostly been, overseas. 1940 is the year he comes to the American studios. And he really comes. I mean, he has Foreign Correspondence, which also got nominated for Best Picture. But then he has this film, Rebecca. And this is a big hit. You know what I mean? Like for the studios. I mean, in terms of numbers today, it would have been $109 million on a $23 million budget. I mean, it was a 5 times multiplier. And people had never seen, unless you had really focused on his early stuff, this is his big breaking out party for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And it's such an interesting movie. And it's got big stars. It's got Joan Fontaine, who had just won the Oscar, and it's got Laurence Olivier, you know what I mean? It's so these are big names, and having this master director that we all know and is one of the greatest directors of all time, making, I think, arguably, at least in my opinion, my favorite Alfred Hitchcock film is Rebecca. Like, I love this movie so much. So it's going to be interesting later when you ask me the question at the end of this episode, what I have to say. But, but I think of that, in that the wave of Hitchcock coming in mixed with David O. Selznick, who is one of those producers that a certain someone that I will not name anymore probably gained a lot of inspiration for.
Yes.
And the way you just bombard a campaign. I think he wanted this Oscar even more than he wanted Gone with the Wind. And because he just campaigned the hell out of it. He threw money left and right. If you go back and read, everything from that time period, he was going for it. And, John Ford, they had, correct me if I'm wrong, they had already given him an Oscar by this point.
Yes. This was his second. Yeah.
This was his second one for Grapes of Wrath. Mm-hmm. And I do ultimately think it goes to the Grapes of Wrath. While we found a lot out of it at the time in 1940, that is a heavy film to grasp and a heavy film to get. Plus, it was also released 3 months before Rebecca came out. So it was released in January. Rebecca was released in April, which is, think of your two frontrunners in January and April nowadays. Well, actually, that might be the case this year.
That's true.
But Rebecca just kind of just goes, it just has a staying power, and it is a more entertaining film. If you're looking for entertainment and escapism, look no further than Rebecca, which is this crazy romantic gothic, psychological thriller that has a wallop of an ending and is very timeless and a classic too. So we are talking about two classics here, Kevin. We're not like,
I know.
We're talking about some pretty great all-time films. So
yeah,
I just think it's that. I think it's Selznick and Hitchcock are the reasons why it lost, and then it just carries it over the top with its entertainment value.
Right. And adding on to your comment about the campaign from Selznick, it really was that, like, it really did kind of found what would become a modern campaign in terms of, like, he changed Hollywood Boulevard to Rebecca Lane for a little bit. Like, it was that level. It was like, and we see that today. We see, like, Amazon spending money to turn Los Angeles into, like, the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel in the 50s and 60s for a week, and disastrous results, but that's another topic. So yeah, I love Rebecca. I'm fascinated by Rebecca, and I do think it is an atypical Best Picture winner because of how gothic and dark it is. I really hate that they couldn't just go ahead and give Alfred Hitchcock the Best Director win here, because it would have been so deserving. The story is drawn out so subtly, and I love what it says about the past, your past relationships, and how they can haunt you. I love that Rebecca herself is never shown. It's such a spooky little thriller, and it just never goes for any, like, cheap stunts, I don't think. And there are so many individual pieces here that I love. Joan Fontaine, I think, is great. I mentioned on the Citizen Kane episode that I wasn't really a fan of her in Suspicion, which she won for. But here, I think she's on point, and she makes for a really great kind of straight woman reacting to the world around her. And Laurence Olivier is brilliant, definitely one of his best performances that I've seen from him. He's perfect for that kind of haunted aspect of the film. Yeah. And of course, Judith Anderson,
oh my God,
as Mrs. Danvers is terrifying and iconic. She is a legend. She is the moment. She will be the moment again soon when the remake comes out. That's another topic. Just such a fierce, commanding presence. And I do think that all of these things are great, and I can see why it became a hit, and I can see why it would do so well. Obviously, with all the technical nominations and the acting nominations it received are all well deserved. But I have to say, I am still a little bit surprised that it did win, to be quite honest, because like I said, it does feel a bit atypical for me. I think The Grapes of Wrath really fits in well with what the Oscars were rewarding before and after. I mean, you look at How Green Was My Valley and The Best Years of Our Lives, movies that are big ensemble films that are about relevant subject matter, about family and relationships, and don't have that level of like darkness to them. You know, something like Mrs. Miniver too is in that vein. I just feel like The Grapes of Wrath fits in so perfectly with that sort of thing that I find it so interesting that it actually lost. And I think what you were saying earlier might be part of it, in terms of just Rebecca was just more beloved, and that who knows if there was any sort of feelings about The Grapes of Wrath and what it was trying to say, and if it had like any sort of sympathies towards far left things that people weren't comfortable with. But I don't know. I find it to be one of the more puzzling instances that I've ever covered here, that a movie was a runner-up and not a winner. Do you get where I'm coming from there?
I get what you're saying. I think one other factor you have to take into consideration too, and I know you haven't done this episode yet, Kevin, but the big American epic was done the year before with Gone with the Wind. Right. So you have this other more modern big American epic. Like, it's stripped down, obviously, like we talked about, but the story and the scope of The Grapes of Wrath is very epic. Like, I think a lot of movies just are in this time. You know, it's very hard to make grounded films when these studios are just throwing money at the wall. But compared to Rebecca, I mean, Grapes of Wrath is an $800,000 film at the time that feels very big. And Rebecca feels, with a $1.28 million budget at the time, it does feel actually a little bit more grounded, because it's set in this giant, beautiful House Mandalay, you know, and so I think that Gone with the Wind might have hurt it a little bit as well. And that plays well into Selznick, because I mean, like, he was the guy that was driving that one home the year before. And so he can be like, yeah, we already gave it to that one. How about this guy that you've probably never seen before? And we can't discredit that Rebecca just does feel like something that American audience might not been privy to before this time period. And this kind of entertainment and the shock value. And yeah, having a character like Mrs. Danvers in a film, to me, sets it over the top, because it is such a interestingly layered performance. It's it's a villain, but it's also, she's so layered, and it's so memorable. And then you have these two, you have Fontaine and you have Olivier, who are impeccable in the film. That everything just clicks. And I also want to say one thing about Rebecca too. Shout out to Hitchcock for letting and having the gumption to, when he came over to Hollywood, to bring Joan Harrison with him and to write Foreign Correspondence and to write Rebecca, because Rebecca works because it's an adaptation of a female's novel from the female's perspective as well. And we see this a lot, where movies that are directed and adapted by men, they lose something. And Hitchcock, worked with her throughout his entire career. She even became like producer on his television show later in his career. So shout out to him for, in 1940, 80 years ago, the biggest director now of all time, one of them at least, using his power to, propel a talented woman in a craft where people were not pushing that a lot. And then she got double nominated, which is even better, and she deserves both of them. Yeah,
and she should have won, maybe.
That
would have been nice.
That would have been nice. Saying. That would have been great.
I mean, this is just such a weird Oscar year, because none of the Best Picture nominees won more than 2 awards. So And the movie that got
doing
3 wasn't even nominated for Best Picture. So all over the place as far as like what the message is of like, this was not a sweeping year by any means. So I don't know. We'll certainly get into that. But I do think it's just maybe the Gone with the Wind factor was just like, we've sort of done this type of thing before. And certainly they like to sort of take a year off of something if they feel like they just rewarded it. Sometimes several years off of something if they feel like they've just rewarded it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think on quality, you could just say that like, regardless of what Academy trends are, of what the types of films that they like to reward for Best Picture, that Rebecca just rose to the top because it was the best film. Like, as simple and sort of subjective as that sounds, it was just kind of undeniable at a certain point, and it got the support of pretty much every branch of the Academy. It got 11 nominations. So, yeah, I mean, but that's not to say anything about The Grapes of Wrath, which still won Best Director. I mean, that clearly shows that there was a clear support there. And I think with like Jane Darwell winning over Judith Anderson, that there was a significant pocket here where it was the two of these movies duking it out. But I'll get to my thoughts on which one I think deserved it at the end. I'm sort of just like censoring myself here of like saying that like maybe Rebecca won because it was the best. I don't know. What a thought. But yeah, we'll get to that later. I want to get to several questions we got here because a lot of people wanted us to talk about these two movies. All right, here we go. Let's start off with Valerie Cherish, aka Kyle Bailey. If Grapes of Wrath swept this year, do you think How Green Was My Valley would have done as well the following year?
Wow. Ooh.
So going in the opposite direction.
Yeah. I think that that's a good point. I mean, I think that if Grapes of Wrath wins picture, maybe you're flipping the films that you talked about on last episode.
Yeah.
And maybe Kane goes in there. I could definitely see that. I mean, that happens. That happens now, doesn't that? You know, in Oscars for, you know. So I could see that. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to win back to back. You know, it's not uncommon for directors to win, you know, from multiple projects. Though it would have been really crazy if Ford would have won back to back years picture. That would have been interesting. But yeah, I don't think that I do think that if Grapes of Wrath would have won, then Citizen Kane wins Best Picture.
Yeah. Or another film like Sergeant York, or who knows what else. I don't know.
Maybe.
Who knows? Yeah, I sort of think that it might have had a significant influence that, like, we're going to go back to the same type of movie winning every year now. That I don't think that would have been realistic. So, yeah. This is from Jackson DeStefano. Jane Darwell versus Judith Anderson is one of the most iconic supporting actress face-offs of all time. Who do you think should have won?
Oh my God. I saw this question before this episode and I was dreading it because we talk so much about Jane Darwell's performance in The Grapes of Wrath and how it is the emotional center of that film.
Yep.
Oh. But man, Judith Anderson's so damn good in Rebecca. I think I would. I know I'm gonna get hate either way for this, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. I would take away Darwell's Oscar, and I would have given it to Judith Anderson for Rebecca, because for me, I think Mrs. Danvers is a more iconic character, and what Judith Anderson does with it is extraordinary. It's not to take anything away from Jane Darwell, who is, like I said, extraordinary as well in Grapes of Wrath. But man, I think the most iconic character of Rebecca is Mrs. Danvers. And, you know, so yeah, I would say it goes to her. It's close though, Kevin. That's a real tough one. That's probably the toughest question you've ever asked me on this podcast.
Yes. Well, I am going to say that I would keep it with Jane Darwell. Yeah, because I do think that Judith Anderson absolutely slayed that role. I mean, people know about this performance, so I don't need to go into it, but like she is just chilling, icy, everything that role required and more. The ending is just with her face and how, I don't want to say crazed she is, but just it's just so memorable. I think that Jane Darwell manages to elevate what is on the page.
Yeah.
And that I try my hardest when I'm looking at these performances as far as what is the best, as far as best actress here, is that I try to separate iconic character, really well written character, from just what the performance is that the actor is doing. And so that's kind of where I feel like Jane Darwell has a very slight edge on Judith Anderson, who I think that I can't think of anyone else in the Judith Anderson role, but I sort of feel like maybe if someone else had the role that it might have been a similar type of performance. And I don't know how much that is true of Jane Darwell, but I feel like I'm already just besmirching Judith Anderson too much here. And it's so rude to ask this question. So I'm just going to say that they should have tied.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah, I think that's actually the best answer we could have said. Scratch both of our answers. They tied. It was and, both get Oscars. And next question, please, Kevin.
Yes, if Katharine Hepburn and Barbara Streisand can tie, then so can Jane Darwell and Judith Anderson.
Damn
Period.
Right. Damn right.
So, well, Andrew Carden says, is Jane Darwell the decade's best supporting actress winner? And then in parentheses, he says the correct answer is without question, yes. Okay, so I have seen all of these performances now, and easily the best. I think there are many good performances here, but none of them reach the level of emotion that Jane Darwell brings out. So definitely the best.
Yeah, I think she's the best. She's the one that stands out the most. She just I think she's also the most, in my opinion, the most important to the film. And
exactly.
The other ones are, there's good performances, don't get me wrong. You got a decade full of great performances from, deserving actresses, but to me personally, no, she's great. That's why it's such a tough choice between her and Judith Anderson, because they're both all-time performances wrapped in the same year. And so
which sucks.
But, it really does suck. Because
you wish you could just reward both of them.
Yeah, and just and get rid of somebody else in the Decades Award, or I don't know. But no, it's the best. Andrew, you are right. It is without a doubt her.
The only one that would come close is maybe like Mercedes McCambridge and All the King's Men, I think, is good. Celeste Holm, Gentleman's Agreement is good. Claire Trevor, I suppose. But I don't know. I mean, I really, it's in a class of its own. So let's move on. Cody Derricks says, why was Rebecca the one Hitchcock that was able to go all the way?
Because it's the most traditional one, I guess you could say. And it was
and it's so lavish, and the production design,
and it's also the first time American audiences are really getting to see him, and it feels like it could be set anywhere, the film. Also a lot of Hitchcock stuff later on in his career. Wow, I love them, and they are great. They're very, at the time, he turns into a genre-y kind of guy. He's very genre.
Exactly.
And this one's just across it's one of those things that when we talk about, like, why doesn't something like Widows or another movie of modern time attract the Academy, when obviously the Oscars have loved previous work? And it's like, well, if you look at something like 12 Years a Slave, that's more down across the board, as opposed to something like Widows, which is a genre, using Steve McQueen as an example here on the mind. So not to say that he's on the level of Hitchcock. I just love Steve McQueen's work. But I think that's the reason why Cody is because it's the most accessible. Sometimes the most accessible is the one that always wins, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it is like, not to be too reductive, but it's like the most prestige feeling in general that I can think of that like would attract a higher crowd, if you know what I mean. Just, like I look at the other Hitchcock films that even have come close, like A Rear Window and some of these others, like Suspicion and Spellbound, and most of them, first of all, just don't reach the heights of Rebecca in general. But on the other hand, it just, like, Rebecca is such an epic story with so many interlocking characters, all of it told expertly, and it is kind of like that thing of, like, we have this film, we've given it Best Picture, and now this director, we don't feel like we necessarily owe him very much after that. I mean, that changes depending on the person, as we know. Like, that didn't stop, like, Alejandro G. Iñárritu from being like, well, we rewarded Birdman, but are we going to reward him for The Revenant? Yeah, sure, why not? Here's a second one. But, so, it's all inconsistent, but I do think perhaps also the British factor, who knows if there were feelings about that. So, I don't know. Hopefully that made sense.
No, it makes sense.
Let's move on to Catherine Short. Does Henry Fonda give one of the greatest performances of all time in The Grapes of Wrath?
Oh my God. Of all time?
Yeah.
Jeez. Oh, with that homicide line reading alone, it's great. He's very good. He's very good in the movie. I'm not going to go all time. That's probably more of a Kevin question than a me, because, even in this lineup, you look at the Best Actor lineup, which I'm sure we'll talk about, Kevin. I mean,
yes, we will.
I don't know if he's even my favorite or second favorite actor in the lineup. So if I'm doing it based off that, I can't say he's the greatest of all time. He's certainly very good, and it's high in his work of an extraordinary career. So right. I can't go all the way with it, but I can say it's a very good performance.
Yeah, I think it's a great performance, but I would not have rewarded him either. More on that later. We have a lot of questions, so I'm just trying to do a rapid fire here. All right.
Okay.
Gabriel Guarian said, why didn't Alfred Hitchcock win Best Director even though Rebecca won Best Picture?
Oh my God.
Do we think?
Oh, the director split?
Yeah.
Because, John Ford is very industry, and I don't know if Selznick
he's their
was
guy.
Really, yeah, he's their guy. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know if Selznick. You'd have to go back into the stuff, but he was really pushing Rebecca.
Right.
And yeah, Hitchcock is definitely attached to it, and yes, definitely, it's a wonderfully directed film. I think in some ways you could reward The Grapes of Wrath the best way with that director win, and then award Rebecca with picture. And it's a good split. I think this is actually a wonderful split. Some years we don't get a good split in recent memory, and we won't go down that. But I think this is probably the best split ever.
One of them, yes. I would have to go back and check that. I don't know if I'm willing to make that claim yet.
Well,
but...
I'm looking at Grapes of Wrath and Rebecca as the two films that are part of the split.
I'm glad that they split.
Yeah,
I'm very glad that they split. So, I'll say
but
that.
Like what you said earlier, though, it does bum me, or at least the question was, it is bumming me out though that Hitchcock didn't win this. Because if it goes the other way around, I think it's fine because. Wrath then wins picture, and then Hitchcock does get an Oscar, so then we don't have to give him an honorary down the road, or have to worry about that. But then, yeah.
And I will just say, John Ford has won 4 Best Director prizes. I think his direction in The Grapes of Wrath is great and very award-worthy, absolutely. But I don't know if he needs 4. I'll just say that.
4 is a lot.
4 is the record. He has the record. So
4, and that'll never. Some of the greatest directors of all time don't have 1. Case in point, Alfred Hitchcock. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I'm like, please, sir, could you spare 1? Like, come on.
Nope. It's his. He's not taking it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sad.
Alan French pretty much asked the same question, so see previous comments. Jeffrey Kerr said, Rebecca is one of very few films to have won Best Picture and only one other award. Did it deserve to win anything else? Well, you already said Judith Anderson, so.
Mm-hmm. I would have said Joan Fontaine for actress too. I really, I mean, if you want to get into Kitty Foyle now, we can.
No,
but,
not yet.
Okay. But I love Joan Fontaine and Rebecca. And when I think about the film, I think of like that scene, and I think it's about 30 to 40 minutes in, and it's like Judith Anderson just following Fontaine around and getting under her skin, moving by the window and just like driving her. It's so good. And but there's so much within that performance too, and I think that's why she ultimately wins the next year. Correct?
Right.
Is I think she wins. It's like another actor we'll talk about later. You're winning for like almost 2 years of work,
right?
And it's a culmination award, but she deserved it, I think, for that one. I would say that, and then. Yeah, I mean, you could go director. I would keep it with Ford. I couldn't give it screenplay. Sorry. So I'm just looking real quick just to see where else it landed, but art direction for sure. Like how the hell did it lose art direction? It's such a beautiful house, Kevin.
I know.
And after like last year, nominees for last year was like the year of houses in 2019. So, I mean, Mandalay it's character it's a character within the film in my humble opinion. So,
absolutely,
I think it should have won at least like 3 or 4.
Yeah, I would have taken Best Actress over what we got for sure. I don't know if I would say that Joan Fontaine deserved to win over the lineup, but over Ginger Rogers, yes. I think art direction absolutely was a robbery. I honestly think film editing would have been a great win for it too, because it's very well paced, and it deservedly won cinematography. That's the only award it won outside of Best Picture, which is wild because it's doesn't win for acting or directing or writing, which is extremely rare. But yeah, I'll do that. So 3 or 4 other wins, I think. So we got several questions about Joan Fontaine, which is Corey Zimmerman and Lucino Visconti, both asking basically if Joan Fontaine won for Suspicion the following year because they snubbed her for Rebecca, and if it was kind of a goodwill thing. I think absolutely that is what happened.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Taken in tandem, I think she had hit after hit, and they were like, okay, this is an actress to watch. We're gonna give her that Oscar. Yeah, even though it's for the worst performance. But welcome to the Oscars.
Very true. No, I agree with you, Kevin. Yeah.
Final question on Rebecca. Steve K said, thoughts on the new Rebecca movie? Do you think they will cater more to the movie, or they would be a little more bold and adapt the novel entirely from scratch?
Oh, wow. Well, I will say that Ben Wheatley is no Alfred Hitchcock, but I can give or take with him. Like sometimes he's a very stylistic director. I think he has a lot of Hitchcock influences within his work. But I'm interested in it from the standpoint of the casting. I think Lily James in the Joan Fontaine role is I think that's actually really good.
Yeah, I like that.
And I think the big shoes of Mrs. Danvers being filled by Kristen Scott Thomas, I'm for that all the way.
I think that's perfect casting. Perfect casting.
Very perfect casting.
Yeah. I'm concerned for Armie Hammer, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I think that's where you were going with this.
To follow in Laurence Olivier's footsteps? I mean, that's...
Yeah.
Hey, look, I love me some Hammer. Like, he's a great actor. He was great in Call Me By Your Name. He's great in The Social Network. The Man from U.N.C.L.E., really underrated performance as well. I think he's a very good actor. But to step into that role from Laurence Olivier, who's one of the greatest actors of all time, I am worried about that. And I am worried about the direction and how they're going to go with it, because they're following an all-time classic. And usually when you remake films that are classics in general, let alone films that are remakes of Best Picture films, I'm looking at you, all the Kingsmen, they don't tend out to be very good. So we shall see. It's coming on Netflix later this year.
Yes.
And we just got to see
October.
the first stills. Yeah, we got to see the first stills. So if anything, it'll be fine. But at least we have Rebecca. And I don't know about you, Kevin. I think I'm interested in seeing the art direction and seeing how the house looks. It's got to be. If the house isn't up to par, then you might as well not make the film.
Pretty much. I would agree. I am deeply concerned about this film. I'm walking into this with a lot of trepidation. I mean, I like the story itself, so I will check it out, and just curiosity will make me check it out. But I don't know about remaking Rebecca. I mean, it's just... Also, on a filmmaking level, I see it in black and white. I just don't see it in color for whatever reason. I just don't know if that's going to cheapen things too much, having it be on digital. I mean, I don't know. I have thoughts.
Yeah,
as
I feel
Jerry
like
would say from Succession. I have thoughts, but continue.
I feel like I need to see it though on the big screen. Like I know,
yeah,
seeing it at home. Like, look, you know me, Kevin. I don't mind. I'll see a movie anywhere, anytime that's new. Give it to me. But there are certain movies where I'm like, yeah, I need to see that at home. Like the reason why Parasite works so much because of its big production design and why we loved it is because we got to see it on a big screen. And I need to see the value of what they put behind Netflix puts behind this movie on a big screen to fully appreciate it, much like I did with Hitchcock. Otherwise, if I don't, then I'm watching it at home on my very decently sized screen, mind you. But it takes away something, and it could ultimately, like you said, harm the film.
Mm-hmm. We shall see. Yes. Stay tuned for my thoughts on Twitter in October. I'm sure a lot of people have thoughts. All right, so we have 8 other films to talk about here for Best Picture. I want to briefly get to all of them. We definitely cannot get into depth for most of these because it will be like 3 or 4 hours if we did that. So let's keep our thoughts.
I thought we were breaking the record
somewhat brief
today.
I mean, if that's your goal, then we'll see where it takes us.
It's fine.
Let's go to the Philadelphia story. Let's start off big. So this is obviously the quintessential, I think, Katharine Hepburn performance. This and Bringing Up Baby, obviously pairing up nicely together. But I absolutely love Katharine Hepburn in this. She is, for those who may not know, for some reason, she's playing this wealthy woman who is briefly married to Cary Grant before they just drove each other crazy, and now she's marrying someone else. Jimmy Stewart comes in as a reporter alongside Cary Grant to cover their wedding. Hijinks ensue. Really witty, really clever. Katharine Hepburn is just peak Katharine Hepburn here in terms of totally leaning into her mannerisms and everything she does best. The repartee is great, and the mid-Atlantic voice that she does obviously is iconic. Just the boldness, the fashion. I mean, you could see why this would become such an iconic film because of her specifically.
It's another all-time classic,
Yes.
wrapped within this year. I mean, we're going to talk about probably another one too here in a couple of minutes, but it's wonderful. I think it deserved the screenplay because it is one of those just great screenplays. It's got so much going on in it. I think that you're right. It's a quintessential Hepburn performance. Cary Grant is phenomenal in it, and I think he got very overlooked throughout this whole year.
Yep.
So like the year of Cary Grant in these comedies, and yet he got no love, so shame on you, Oscars. And Jimmy Stewart's fine in this movie.
Yes.
He's there. I think that the character is good. I think maybe Jimmy Stewart's a little miscast. Maybe that's just my one thing I could say that's about Philadelphia Story that I would swap out. But beyond that, great movie. I love it. One of those just classic Hollywood films you could put on over and over again and watch it. It's funny, light,
Truly.
and great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is another case that we have here, like Joan Fontaine, of Jimmy Stewart giving a great performance and the Oscars being like, we'll go with someone else this year. And then they're like, oh shit, we should have awarded him then and rewarded him for this because he had Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which we'll talk about in a few weeks. And obviously a beloved performance from him and carries the whole thing. But here he's here again. And they're like, well, you're here. We're sorry for last year. Here you go. Because
it feels like a supporting performance, doesn't it?
Yes, very much so. And if this was 80 years later, he would absolutely be in supporting.
Which, I mean, if it's in supporting, that's fine. It works. I mean, you can play whether he or Grant, should be getting in. But for a lead, I totally agree with you. I mean, I know you'll talk about it at a different time, but Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, one of the greatest performances of all time. That's an all-time performance. To then have to kind of do a makeup Oscar the next year, it just absolutely sucks. Because I wouldn't give him this award. I would not give him this award. And I look at his 5 nominations that he got. This is the least of them. Yes.
And it just bums me out when that happens, where they reward someone on pretty much their worst nomination. Cough, cough, Al Pacino. Another story.
Okay. Yeah. I thought you were going to go cough, cough, Revenant because I know you don't like it. So with Leo, but
well, I actually, that applies too. So thank you.
And you got to know your host.
Yes, I appreciate it. But I would have preferred him to win for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, obviously, or It's a Wonderful Life, or Harvey, or Anatomy of a Murder. Any of those would be great. I would be fine. But here, I'm like, okay, we made our choice. I also think Ruth Hussey is very good here. She damn near steals the film out from under everyone, which is great.
Yeah.
So happy she got a nomination for supporting actress. All right, let's get to a few questions here. Both Chelsea and Ronaldo Sosa wanted us to talk about Katharine Hepburn, saying that if she had won for the Philadelphia Story, do we think she would have also won her 3 Oscars that she would later get for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, The Lion in Winter, and On Golden Pond? So she would have 5 at that point.
Yeah, I think she would. I mean, Katharine Hepburn's the GOAT of not just actresses, might be of actors in general. And I mean, you have to take it within. I think now we think more about numbers than back then. I think they just loved her and got swept up in the craze, and she's everything she does. It's so effortless. So I mean, if she won for this and she had 5, I think Meryl would be in a really worse situation that she is trying to just get a 4th sometime. And I do think Meryl will probably get that. But if she had 5, I mean, forget about it, folks.
You'll never catch me now. Yes. Yeah. I think maybe she would have had less of a chance of winning that one for On Golden Pond. Maybe there would have been discussions about it because we're getting into the 80s at that point, and maybe people were taking that a little more seriously at that point. But I sort of agree that she probably would have just won 5, which is wild, but deserved in most cases here. Yeah. Okay. Steve K said, do you agree with Jimmy Stewart's assessment that he won because he lost the year before? Yes, first of all. We already talked about it, but
I love how honest he is though about it. Like when I was reading up on it, like Jimmy Stewart's like, well, I didn't win because of the past. I won, whatever. I don't know. But that
was good. That was good. Yeah. And then he says, could Cary Grant get nominated for the Philadelphia Story with this possible narrative, or he wouldn't have been nominated either way? Is there a wonderful scenario where both could get in?
No, I mean, well, when he didn't get in, which sucks. But if he was going to get in, he was probably going to have to get in supporting, because his is a very true supporting performance as well. Though I feel like I remember him more. I don't think they were going to pull 2 out. So yes, the way that they did it and the way they campaigned it, that's probably how it would have worked. And it didn't, and it sucks. So
yeah. I just love Cary Grant in general, so I feel like I remember him more as well for different reasons.
Well, it's because of the dynamic of their past marriage and everything, and he's the setup to them going out, and for Stewart and Hussey to get out there in the first place. It's
yeah, and his cute little face.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes.
Anyway, yeah, it's very, very rare to get. Obviously, we know that's very rare to get double nominated for the same film in a lead category. So I don't know. I mean, maybe the film could have been strong enough to get there. Maybe he came close. Probably closer for this than His Girl Friday, but maybe that was a case of splitting votes. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to The Letter. The Letter.
Oh
let's move on to let's do two of these at once. Let's do the Bette Davis movies together.
Everybody had two movies this year.
She's that much of a badass that she had two films in the running for Best Picture in the same year. Go Bette Davis. Okay, so starting with The Letter, because I think it got a directing nomination, so probably had more support. Yeah, so Bette Davis, badass bitch, once again, playing a woman who murders a man in, like, the opening scene, which is fun, and she's charged with murder, and there's this letter, the titular letter, that she had written to a man the day she murdered him, and it's now in the hands of his widow, so lots of intrigue. It's all taking place in Malaya, which is basically around the area of Singapore. So this being Hollywood in the year 1940, there's some yellowface. The man's widow is Eurasian, played by a woman who is very much not of any kind of Asian descent. So do you have thoughts on The Letter?
It's William Wyler, too.
Yes, it is.
This film. The great William Wyler. Yeah, it is. It's a picture for sure, Kevin.
What a picture.
What a picture. To our best Pacinos. But no, I love it because of Bette Davis. Because it is such an insane premise. And just the way it opens, you're right. She just goes out, shoots a guy, and she's like, all right, I didn't do anything wrong. Why would I get charged for anything? Right? And so, and it's such a Bette Davis move. I do think that, there are very much a lot of problematic issues with, they didn't really have to do this film in the location it's at. Like, they could have done this anywhere. But her performance is what puts it over the top for me. And I do like Herbert Marshall in it as well. Who plays her husband, and there's some very heartbreaking scenes at the end, and I wish it would have ended right there, because then there's like 5 more minutes of just it just goes, it doesn't know how to just pull itself back a little bit. But other than that, I think it was like Brandon Stanwyck, a friend of ours, that said, like, the letter crawled so that Primal Fear could run on his letterbox, and when I saw that, I totally agree with him. So shout out to Brandon for that. Because this is like the ultimate, like, I did, legal who did it, done it, or whatever. Yeah. And what a letter, by the way. What a letter.
Yeah. Yeah. This one is interesting because the ending was changed, obviously. I think you can kind of tell even watching it. I didn't even know about it beforehand, but I felt like this is interesting way to wrap this up. I don't want to spoil it too much, but let's just say that the code being what it was, they really wanted the Bette Davis character to be punished, which she wasn't in the original source material so much. So, perhaps you'll understand what I mean if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, I'm sure you will, but yes.
Ooh,
Yeah. I mean, I think there are some very interestingly edited and framed sequences. Like whenever she's interacting with the widow, it's always very moody and mysterious in a way that I kind of enjoyed. But otherwise, lots of weird, problematic racial stuff happening that I don't, again, sort of like what you were saying, I don't know if it needs to do that. I just don't really understand the reason for the setting so much. But yeah. Let's move on to All This in Heaven 2, which is the other Bette Davis vehicle nominated for Best Picture. Okay. So, I mean, first of all, I just want to say Bette Davis's career at this point is the kind of career that every actress would dream of. playing all these complex, varied roles, not always likable women with these rich backstories, amazing arcs. You know, sometimes she gets away with it, sometimes she doesn't, but she always just gives everything to each character. And that's really what kind of carries films for me that aren't quite as good, which is where All This and Heaven 2 comes in. So this is the longest film, I believe, of the 10.
Yeah.
And I feel that length. It's close to 2.5 hours. It's a melodrama about a woman who has a interesting past. She was a governess working for a duke and a duchess. The duke starts to fall for her. The duchess is jealous. Something happens. And once again, Bette Davis becomes embroiled in a big trial. Interesting parallels between the two. Any thoughts on this one?
She really loves skirting jail in 1940 in her roles, right?
She does. She's dangerous.
She's fierce, man. She is.
Yes.
She's Bette frickin' Davis. Yeah, I didn't like. I don't know. Like, this movie is. You're right. It is very long, and I feel like you should get a medal for watching it because of the length it's felt. The story on paper is actually very compelling and very interesting. I think if you maybe can go back and shave 30 minutes out of it, I think you could make a really solid film. I just think it's way too long. Though I think Davis is better in the letter, but this is the better film, if that makes sense. And I think Charles Boyer, her male counterpart in the film, is very good opposite her. And both these films, like, they're not like upper tier, of Bette Davis's films, but they're also two very good performances. I just prefer her in the letter because I think that that's just a little bit more pulpy and this is a little bit more traditional.
Right. I would agree that sort of it is too long and you could trim a lot, especially from that endless middle section where it's just like all leading up to this thing that happens at like the 2-hour mark. That feels like we're finally kicking into what the story will be about. It's a lot of lead up to that particular thing happening that could very much be condensed. But I think it's fine. It's definitely, for me, towards the bottom of this Best Picture lineup. But interesting to see Bette Davis in a role like this that I think is actually more warm and not quite as villainous. But I guess I typically find her more compelling in those other kinds of roles that are more villainous and diva, so it's a mixed bag. Let's get to these two questions. Speaking of Brandon Stanwyck, here's Brandon here. Does it seem odd to you that All This and Heaven 2 missed out on art direction, considering how many sizable sets that had to be built and decorated?
Oh my God. Yeah, it's a glaring omission. Also, Brandon, you'll get your medal, like I said, for watching the film in the mail. I mean, sometimes just weird stuff happens with the Oscars and they just miss something. And that should have definitely happened because that is one good thing going for it. It is a very good looking movie.
Yeah. And there are 13 nominations in Best Art Direction this year. 13. 13. And none of them are All This and Heaven 2. I don't know what happened. Like, that is genuinely confusing to me, and I don't have a solid explanation for it, which alarms me. So I definitely think it should have been in there, and it probably should have maybe won if Rebecca wasn't there. So I don't really know what happened. Yeah. But it only got 3 nominations, so maybe they just weren't feeling it.
I think they were feeling the letter more from Davis.
Oh yeah,
I mean, because of the director and Davis nominations and stuff like that. They were very much feeling that movie, and I think All This and Heaven 2, they were just okay, we'll get it, we'll get it in because we have 10, but couldn't squeeze in 14 nominations over there. You already had 13.
Right.
Jesus.
What's one more?
What's one more? I mean, every film made should have gotten in that category at this point.
Everyone gets a nomination. Yeah. Well, you already answered this one, so I'll take it. But Ronaldo Sosa said, do you think that Bette Davis deserved her nomination for The Letter, or was she better in All This in Heaven too? I will say that I think that she got the correct nomination for The Letter, and that it's a much more interesting character, and she is given more to do. So I agree with the Academy on that one, at least. But let's go to the person that beat her. Let's talk about Kitty Foyle. Okay, so you just heavily sighed, so why don't you go ahead?
This movie, it's just so much, Kevin. It is.
How much is it?
It is a lot. It's so much going for it, and it's not 100% particularly good. I think Ginger Rogers is good in the role. I would not have given her the Oscar, like I've already stated before. I would have given it to Fontaine or even Hepburn. But man, it's so ratchet up. It's just a lot for a 2 hour. It's not even like a 2 hour. It's like an hour and 47 minutes.
Yeah.
It just is so depressing. And I don't know. I fought through this one just as much as I fought through All This in Heaven too. I think it was like, and then I started seeing the way it lined up and that it was screenplay, director, picture, actress winner. I was like, good Lord, like they really dug this thing. And so
yeah,
it's it's like I say every year, there's one movie that gets across the board love that I sit there and go, really? That's what we okay. I mean, sure,
her?
But yeah, her, Kitty Foyle. Yeah, it's definitely lower tier in terms of these 10 nominees.
Yeah. So I am of many minds about this movie and about Ginger Rogers, who is undoubtedly a legend.
Yes,
you cannot take that away from her.
It's not a slap against her. It's not a slap against her.
But I really struggle with this one. It feels pretty conservative and outdated.
Yep.
Even if it's tracking the life story of a woman, as it is proudly in its subtitle saying, and the many facets of her life. It sort of begins with what feels like the arc of what we saw in like The Farmer's Daughter, the whole idea of rags to riches. Look at this working class woman who's rising up in the ranks, but it pretty quickly drops that and just becomes about a love triangle and how that's all that matters to a woman. And I don't think that even that she has particularly good chemistry with either of her suitors. She does have one very strong emotional scene that I won't spoil that has to do with a baby. That is very clearly the thing that sealed the deal for her Oscar win, I think. But otherwise, I think this is very much an artifact of its time.
Yep.
So
it's also like the award for most, I think, overacting. Like that ending, I'm just like, oh my God, like I get it. Like, and then it's like, oh well, I'm going to be married tonight, and then she just drives off, and it ends on such a weird note. Like it's like it ends on all this despair and sadness, and then it's happy. It's like, good Lord, what are you doing? Ugh.
Yeah. Catherine Short asks us, the Hays Code meant that the plots of several of the nominees this year, including All This in Heaven 2 and Kitty Foyle, had to be changed. Do you think that the changes improved the films, or do you think that they hurt them? I'm just going to make a blanket statement about the Hays Code. I think that in very few cases did the Hays Code improve any film. So yeah. I'll just say that.
Yeah, no, it did not improve it. And I agree with Kevin.
It made everything more safe and conservative and happy endings when they don't need them and taking out interesting plot lines.
Yep. It takes away chances and risks and it takes away the beauty of cinema.
I mean, yeah, pretty much. As dramatic as that sounds, that is kind of the truth. So I want nothing to do with the Hays Code. Moving on to The Great Dictator.
Oh.
Okay. I'm excited that I can this this is one of his most iconic films and performances, dual performances, actually. So this is a political satire that is poking fun at the rise of Hitler and the sort of man-baby aspect of Hitler in a way that is very provocative. There are a lot of sight gags that are very memorable from this film, like that beautiful moment where he's playing around with the inflatable globe.
Yes.
The Mussolini parody is really fun and clever. And then, of course, it all is leading up to this rousing speech from Chaplin at the end, which is this beautiful, beautifully written plea for peace and unity. This is absolutely one of the films for me that holds up completely 80 years later and is especially relevant now.
Yeah, I mean, this is the other. I think there are 4 undeniable classics of this lineup, and this is the 4th one. This is my best actor winner. This is my best original screenplay winner. I love Chaplin in this movie. It's a really good, just wonderfully biting satire that, you know, he kind of had to apologize for years later, because it, you know, the war and everything, and you know, just Hollywood kind of giving him crap time for it. But he's extraordinary in it, and I think of it as still a cautionary tale, like end over end, just of fascism and dictatorships and things of that nature, and poking fun at them, and you know, treating them as the jokes that they are. Not to say that the whole movements of that in the war is a joke, but their ideal system is a joke. And he juxtaposes, you know, Hinkle's character, the dictator, with this barber, right? And this Jewish barber. And I think that that's really the best stuff of the movie to me, and the stuff that really resonates to me. It's all the small, quiet, you know, heartbreaking, personal stuff that then culminates, like you said, into this just giant speech at the end. That is one of the best speeches ever given in cinema, period. And so, I mean, Evan, I think this is his best film. I think it's his best performance he's ever given in his career. And it's the most important one he's ever given us to cinema. And the world should have treated Charlie Chaplin a hell of a lot better back then, 80 years ago, when this movie released, than we do now, because we think of it as an all-time classic. And it was really going out there, and it wasn't afraid. And I wish we would see more fearless filmmaking like that nowadays.
Agreed. I can't not thinking about this film. The ending speech always sticks in my mind, and I think that is a sequence that could have been very corny, and anything else you could say about it, just in terms of how sentimental that message is. But I think it is beautifully executed. And then, you know, the message that he has for Hannah, that she hears and looks up to the sky in this sense of hope. Like I said, all this could be very corny, and maybe some people think it is, but just thinking about the world at that time, and I mean, even now, 80 years later, seeing the horrible stuff we see on the news every day from our current administration, I am just a wreck watching that ending. And I hate that you stole my brilliant opinion that I think Charlie Chaplin should have won Best Actor over anyone else here.
I'm sorry.
I was going to come in here with that hot take, because everyone's like, oh, Jimmy Stewart, Laurence Olivier, Henry Fonda, you know, it's this epic race. And I'm just like, Charlie Chaplin. I mean, come on. How can you deny that? It's a crowning moment in his career. And I'm really sad that he couldn't win for any of his various nominations that he received.
Yeah, I think that screenplay one really irks me the most. Like, I think that one, the actor, it's a very tough lineup and all that, and we've talked about it. But that screenplay loss just feels like a slap in the face. Like, you're lucky to be here that we've nominated you. That's what it kind of feels like, you know. And
they weren't willing to go there.
And it's like, good Lord, how do you, in that category, like, it's clearly the best screenplay, you know. So
Yep. That feels personal. So
Yeah.
that sucks.
Mhm.
But Tony Roma, 1979, said, "Why was The Great Dictator robbed of everything it didn't win?" I think it just hit too close to home. I think it was people feeling like it was too personal, too provocative, whatever you want to say, and that it really is the classic thing for me of like, they nominated it, but they just weren't ready for it. They weren't ready for it. It was ahead of its time.
Yeah, very much, for sure. Totally agree.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Foreign Correspondent. So this is another Alfred Hitchcock film, as we said, nominated this year. Not quite on the level of Rebecca, I think, but I still think it's pretty engaging. Maybe this is a stretch, but I would almost compare this to like Steven Spielberg making something like Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year, where like Rebecca is the art film, and Schindler's List obviously being analogous there. And then Foreign Correspondent is more of like the crowd-pleasing thrills and chills sort of thing. Except in this case, both of his films are nominated for Best Picture. So that's something. And for those who may not know, it's about this foreign correspondent, groundbreaking, in Europe, who finds himself just in the middle of this big conspiracy, fascism. There's this woman who falls in love with him. Very tense, well-paced. Certainly not top-tier Hitchcock for me, but it's like the North by Northwest flavor of Hitchcock, which is always fun. What do you think?
Yeah, you talk about stealing thunder. You just stole my thunder. Yeah, it's very much in the setup vein for what was to come with North by Northwest and sort of those like adventure films that Hitchcock would do on occasion, like To Catch a Thief and those fun films.
Right.
The entertainment, rather than I think of like Vertigo on like the same level as like Rebecca. They've got elements of horror and in their thrillers and whatnot, but they're more dramas, and they're different than anything else he's doing as a director. And so, yeah, I like the film a lot. Rebecca's clearly better than it though, but it's a fun picture. Don't get me wrong, but it's not on Rebecca's level, and it's another entry point for people. And I think it's another thing that like people can say, hey, that guy that made Foreign Correspondent, he made Rebecca too. Oh yeah, that's right. He's had a really good year. And that's another reason why you can see why Rebecca won Best Pictures. You can tie them together and
that's
sort of be
point.
like an ultimate prize.
Yeah. Gabriel Guarin asked us, is George Sanders better in Rebecca or in Foreign Correspondent?
Oh wow. Yeah, because he uses them in both, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I would say he's better in Foreign Correspondent, just because I feel like he has more to do there. Because I feel like
he very much does.
Yeah. The ladies have so much to do in Rebecca. So yeah, I would say he's better in Foreign Correspondent, but he's great in both. Like, don't get me wrong, he's great in both. But I would definitely say he's better in Foreign Correspondent.
He does have more to do in Foreign Correspondent, but I do enjoy him very much in Rebecca whenever he pops up, which he pretty much does just kind of pop up at random points in a way that's like, that's kind of what you want in a supporting performance. It's like you miss him when he's gone and you love when he's here and he steals the show. So I don't know, maybe I would have nominated him for Rebecca, but either way, I think he was robbed of a nomination for one of them.
Yes.
Yeah, but he would get his win eventually.
Yes, he did.
Let's go to The Long Voyage Home. Yes, so this is a adaptation of a bunch of different Eugene O'Neill plays, directed by John Ford. Here we are.
Oh.
Yep, about men at sea at the beginning of World War II. And John Wayne is here, but he's really not really that kind of big bravado type of masculine character so much, I don't think here. He really blends well with this ensemble. But once again, the real star of the show for me is Greg Toland's cinematography. Like I said, we just talked about him. Really, it's a bleak and dark film, especially for the time period. It's just kind of about men looking out for themselves and just surviving. And so it's interesting on that level. More of a mid-tier here in this lineup, but, still very compelling.
Yeah, Ford is man, he's just really dark this year. He had a mood phase.
Yeah, he was going through it.
Yeah, a little emo Ford going on here. But no, it's a fine picture. To me, it's nowhere near as compelling as Grapes of Wrath. For me personally, it tackles into like you said, the idea of men at sea and how hard it is and dark and everything. It's very much an ensemble picture. I do agree with you. Like, the technical side is, it's hard for John Ford to make a bad technically sound film. I don't know. I didn't connect with this one as much. And I think that maybe that's another reason why Grapes of Wrath didn't win. It's because, maybe some people were like me and didn't connect to The Long Voyage Home. It was like how Ford Correspondent was a positive move for Hitchcock and Rebecca. Maybe, The Long Voyage Home was a little bit of a negative one for Grapes of Wrath. You never know. They are both a little bit darker pictures as well, too. So, it's tough, to say, but yeah, I do agree with you. It's a little bit in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, I'm solid. I don't really have any other thoughts on it. I don't think it's particularly memorable, honestly. So, but I do think it's very pretty to look at. It's very well constructed as a film. I just did definitely struggle to connect to it emotionally. And let's get to our last film here, which is Our Town. So. I would really like to see the play Our Town, just because watching this film, I see very clearly the potential of this story, and I don't want my only experience with this material to be this film. And I say that having seen other people's reviews about how this adaptation really doesn't hit the heights of the play, and they also change the ending very much, which fundamentally changes a lot about it. So actually, Ryan, I remember us talking in the 1957 episode about how we love these kinds of suburban dramas, sort of dark things happening in a sleepy town, and how that's kind of what this is. It's not necessarily dark, but just sort of examining the quiet lives of a small town. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I've already gone back and talked about High School with Grapes of Wrath, so I might as well go back and talk about High School again with Our Town, because we did a production of Our Town my senior year that I was lucky enough to be part of the stage crew, and that actually helped me get stage manager for a musical, but that's another topic for another time. Anyway, I really liked the play Our Town, and we did a fantastic job, if I do say so myself. The crew was phenomenal of that performance. But yeah, this movie is nowhere near what I remember that play being. It's so just paint by numbers, and that's not what this play is. So yes, Kevin, when we get back to normal times, please find a way to see it. Maybe even just a local production, because we didn't take any of the stuff out that clearly this movie does. And it's catering to an audience that, unlike those movies that, like you said, that we did talk about in the 1957 film, this feels like it's so stripped down to being a conservative look at this way of life that it is devoid of any sort of reality. Like John Ford, like we said with John Ford in Grapes of Wrath, that's a conservative with like some different ideas going out there. This movie is like, nope, we are staying in a lane and we are not moving from it. And yeah, they changed the ending, which is, it's a good ending. Why the hell did you have to change it? And so frustrating movie, very frustrating.
Yes. I have to say the climax of this film, I really don't want to spoil too much. But I'll just say that it involves a woman who is experiencing her childhood again, but with the benefit of hindsight, and it's very affecting because she's just like pleading with her family to be more present and to realize what they have, yada, yada, yada. And I don't know what it was, but I was definitely moved by that aspect of it. And then it kind of undoes all of that with a very much a tacked on happy ending that just doesn't work at all. And it really just becomes like sort of misunderstanding perhaps what the play is really about and what it is saying, and just becomes like, hey, isn't small town life nice? And it's like, I guess. Why did we need a movie about it?
You just hand me the pamphlet and move on, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, right. I don't need like a brochure for suburban Connecticut. Like, I get it. Anyway. Yeah. So that's a bit of a whimper for me. Like I said, I do see the potential of the story. And I know that it has been a famous play for a while and is loved, but the film does not do it any justice. So
no, but that'll be the first thing you do after quarantine's done. You're going to go see a local production of Our Town to change
a high school
your
production
mind.
of Our Town.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes. Okay. So quick questions from just the lineup. Ian Daly asked, is there any other acting nominations you think would have been deserved from the picture nominees? And then he lists George Sanders and Florence Bates, Rebecca, Cary Grant, Philadelphia Story, Herbert Marshall, Foreign Correspondent. I mean, I sort of agree with all those. Yeah, so I'll start there.
Those are mine. Those are definitely mine.
I would say... John Carradine, Grapes of Wrath would have been a great nomination. Yeah. So, like I said, that would have been yeah. Other than that, I think they pretty much covered most of the, I'm good. I think it's a really good acting class in general that it's a good variety nominated
amongst everything. It's not one thing dominating everything. So I agree. Right. It's good to see the smattering of films and that were nominated in the Best Picture film, but then also like, some ones that weren't,
Yeah. Ronaldo Sosa asked us, assuming that The Grapes of Wrath, The Philadelphia Story, and Rebecca all make it, what other two films would make a lineup of 5? So we're playing that game.
We're going to play that game, huh? I'm just going to do personal for me. And then I guess I can do Academy. I mean, I guess Academy would be Kitty Foyle. They would have that in there because it got across the board in director and screenplay, right? And then and then it was an actress win, so you would see that probably fitting in that spot. And then The Letter, because it got the director nomination. Personally, for me, I think I would kick out Kitty Foyle, obviously, and I would put in my personal. I put The Great Dictator, and then I would put Foreign Correspondent, because why not? Double Hitchcock. I'm not gonna have a problem with that. Yeah. So personal to me would be Foreign and The Great Dictator. What actually I think the Oscars would do is match the director lineup and do Kitty Foyle and The Letter with Philadelphia Story, Grapes of Wrath, and Rebecca.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was reading Inside Oscar, and they were talking about sort of betting on what would win Best Picture, and there were three movies that they listed as possibilities here, and that was Rebecca, The Grapes of Wrath, and Our Town. Oddly enough.
What?
Yes, I don't know. They didn't really go into why, but they said they were all kind of on an even playing field, and I'm like, okay. So like maybe it had the support to get into a field of 5. I sort of doubt it, but it's a possibility. I would say The Letter
get screenplay though, like that
or director
or director. Yeah, I mean. Okay, all right. That's
so fine. I don't really get that, but I'm just going to go ahead and ignore that and say The Letter definitely, because it got 7 nominations, and it really is hard to ignore that Kitty Foyle did so well as well, and that it probably would have been just the 5 from director, as boring as that is. I would love to say The Great Dictator, but I don't know if it would make 5, just based on the fact that it didn't win anything.
Feels a lot like, I hate comparison because they're similar in some ways, and some people. It's a lot like Jojo Rabbit last year, like
Yeah.
where that wasn't it might have broken in director. Yeah, I got in the screenplay, but it didn't break in there, and yet something like. I'm not. This is weird, putting like Kitty Foyle and Joker in the same comparison, but but like it won an acting prize and got screenplay and it got director.
Sure.
I'm
Sure.
saying Kitty Foyle is the Joker of 1940, is what I'm saying.
Wow.
And
You heard it here first, folks.
You heard it here, folks. But in terms of comparison of how it plays out with the field, that's what it feels like. For just to give it for our listeners out there, Kevin, just
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
a little bit of what it would be like.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get to our should have been a contender segment. Okay. So we're already over 2 hours, so let's try to keep these somewhat brief. Just for the listeners. Do you have one at the top of your list that you feel should have been more of a contender this year?
I have 95 films. No, I'm just kidding.
Let me unfurl your big scroll.
It takes like 45 minutes just to get the scroll going. His Girl Friday.
Yeah.
What a picture. I mean, just one of the best pictures. Why is it nowhere? I love that movie in general. I think it is a great screenplay. I mean, the dialogue and the way it's just moving back and forth, and it's so fast by the end. It's so good. So I would say His Girl Friday for sure. And then, I like, and it got in the original story lineup, but My Favorite Wife with Cary Grant also too.
Mm-hmm.
I like that movie, and it's a reteaming with him and Irene Dunn, and it's a lot of fun. It's a really funny comedy. I'd put that up there. And then my last one, for all you animated fans out there, it's Pinocchio. Like Pinocchio is one of the greatest animated films of all time. Really cemented, Disney and everything. It's so inventive and its story and everything. So those would be the ones for me that highlight the ones that, didn't get anything at all whatsoever.
Yeah. I will agree with you wholeheartedly on His Girl Friday. I don't know where the hell it is. I think it's just because it was too funny, it was just too goofy. And maybe the fact that they were speaking so fast was like divisive. I mean, who knows? It could be any number of reasons. But Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell bounce off each other so perfectly in that film. And it's one of those classic films I remember watching when I first got seriously into considering film as like an art form and watching classic movies. I remember loving it at the time, watched it again this week, and I still love it. I mean, the dialogue is just off the charts.
Ralph Bellamy is amazing in that movie too. I love his Bruce, kind of like the odd man out, and just him always getting like arrested and things. And how his character ends up at the end, like with the counterfeit money. Oh, it's so good. And I actually, I don't know. I guess Grant, they might have moved him in acting. I think he's a supporting actor again in that film until like the last 20-30 minutes of that movie. There's good chunks in the middle he's gone, but Rosalind Russell, like, where is she in Best Actress? I mean,
I know.
Good Lord, take Martha Scott out and just put her in. She's so good in that movie.
Thank you. I agree.
So that's the justice I want to see.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so sad that Rosalind Russell never got an Oscar.
Yeah,
but that just sucks.
Yeah.
I want to talk about The Thief of Baghdad because this is our winningest film of this year, and it doesn't get in for Best Picture. It gets 3 wins. So this was my first time watching it this week because I was just curious about what it would be like to watch this film that was a Hollywood production taking place in the Middle East. And there is very expectedly some brown face, and that is very distracting. And I guess I went into it expecting it to just be really, really dated and just like a relic of its time. It's on the Criterion Channel right now, and obviously I knew that it had a major influence on Aladdin, and I was just curious how it would depict certain things. So having said all that, I had a really great time watching The Thief of Baghdad, actually. It's just kind of bursting with color. Just the action sequences are really thrilling, and the special effects work was innovative because it was the first time that they were using chroma key, which is now the standard with green screen in the industry. I mean, if I had seen this movie in a theater in 1940, it would have just blown my mind, between just like the genie and his gigantic foot stomping down. It's just like, so things that you would have never seen in that kind of a technological advancement at the time. I mean, the magic carpet, that's a whole other thing. It's just a big visual feast that, yeah, it does have some dated elements to it, as you might expect, but I had a surprisingly good time with it, and I understand the wins that it received, including special effects, of course. And then I do want to talk about The Westerner, because that's our Best Supporting Actor winner.
Yeah, it is.
Walter Brennan making history, winning his third Oscar for The Westerner, and he won them all within the first 5 years of the existence of Best Supporting Actor. He won every other year, which is quite a feat. And watching him here, I do understand why he won, all things considered. He's just a really he's just a warm sort of presence, even if he's playing like a villain. He's kind of charming, like a winking devil sort of thing. Menacing, certainly, but also kind of a hopeless romantic. Like, he has a lot of layers to him. You said that you watched this as well. Did you have thoughts on The Westerner?
I think The Westerner's fine. I think he's fine. It's just, I mean, like, it's a little over the top for me. It's another one where I'm like, God, there's so much going on in this performance. He is chewing scenery, like chewing tobacco.
Very much so.
And he is going for it. And it is a little bit of, sort of like an absurd premise, like, some films are. I wouldn't have given it to him. Jack Oakey, I think is his name, for The Great Dictator. I think I would have given it to him. But obviously we've talked about why they weren't going to fall in love with The Great Dictator. Or this is where I would have just gotten rid of Walter Brennan in general and just thrown Cary Grant in for any of his movies for the year. Probably, actually, I would have just thrown him in for His Girl Friday, because I think he's supporting enough in that. And I mean, if you can category fraud with Jimmy Stewart, I'm going to category fraud there with Cary Grant in that. But yeah, it's a fine picture. I know it's a lot of people really like it, and it's but for me, I don't know. I couldn't attach to it, and I really like westerns. Like, westerns is a genre I grew up watching a lot when I was a kid, with my grandpa, and this was one that slipped through the cracks, but I knew he liked it a lot, and I didn't see the love for it like everybody else did.
I mean, I think it's cute. It's a cute little western with, again, a very charming performance from Walter Brennan. Gary Cooper, we've talked about Gary Cooper on this show. I could take or leave him. He's fine here, but you really just want to watch this for Walter Brennan. I think he is quite good here. I don't know if I would give him the win, but it's one of those things where I get it why he won with the performance, just the character type being what it is. So, and yes, Pinocchio absolutely, I think, should have gotten more nominations. It does win, I believe, for best score and song, which Disney would do a lot in the Renaissance of the 90s, but
they still do. I mean,
yeah. Not as much with the score, but songs certainly.
Songs, I mean, yeah. Synonymous in that category.
Daniel B., our friend, Daniel Brilliant, saying, should Pinocchio have been included in this Best Picture lineup? It's a top 5 all-time Disney animated film for me, and it's held up wonderfully since its release.
Yeah, which of the 3 or 4 films that you and I just talked about that we didn't really like that we want to kick out for it? Yeah, it should have been in there. Obviously they saw it. Obviously they liked it. I mean, there is this continuing bias that we talk about a lot in this industry, and it dates back, I mean, all the way, 80 years later. Still, that animated films aren't put up on the same platform as live action films. It's extremely frustrating. The documentaries nowadays are done the same way, where some of the best films of the year are animated documentaries. We just had a foreign language film win Best Picture. I mean, we should have a documentary at a certain point in our lives win Best Picture. We should have a animated film.
Or how about a nomination? Let's start at a nomination for a documentary.
You know what? I like wins. I'm going all the way.
But we still need to break that.
No, that's totally true, and I totally get that. I mean, for God's sakes, like, Pinocchio is a great movie, and it's a sad one too. It's a great achievement by Disney, one of their best, and so I agree. Put it in there, damn it.
When You Wish Upon a Star will endure forever, and I am so glad that they awarded the song there. I mean, everything with the Blue Fairy is great. It's beautifully animated, especially for it being only, I think, the second Disney feature-length animated film. Really well done. That's all I have on my list. Do you have anything else you wanted to talk about from 1940?
No, I think we've covered a lot.
We sure have. We sure have, folks.
All good.
All right. Well, let's go to our final segment. When we come back, we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Rebecca deserved Best Picture or if The Grapes of Wrath should have taken it. This actually is kind of a race here, so I'm excited to see what we say.
Announcing the return of the most glamorous motion picture ever made, David O. Selznick and Alfred Hitchcock bring you the Grand Slam prize winner that made motion picture history. Winner of the Academy Award, voted by America's critics as the best picture of the year. And now, as a result of a national poll, winning new honors as audiences throughout the country vote to see it again. The Selznick Studio's successor to Gone with the Wind, Rebecca, brought to the screen with all the warmth and emotion that made millions of readers acclaim Daphne du Maurier's bestseller as the most exciting love story of our time. The fascinating Max de Winter lives on the screen in the person of Laurence Olivier.
Why, it's Max de Winter.
How do you do? The shy, unsophisticated young girl who dared to follow in the footsteps of the beautiful Rebecca is portrayed by lovely Joan Fontaine.
How could I ask you to love me when I knew you loved Rebecca still? Whenever you touched me, I knew you were comparing me with Rebecca.
What is the mystery of Rebecca? What dread secret is hidden within the silent walls of Manderley?
It's not only in this room. It's in all the rooms in the house. You can almost hear it now. Do you think the dead come back and watch the living?
Tell me, is Mrs. Van Hopper a friend of yours or just a relation?
No, she's my employer. I'm what is known as a paid companion.
I didn't know companionship could be bought.
There is mystery, love, and laughter in Rebecca, the motion picture still unsurpassed for suspenseful romance.
So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Rebecca deserved Best Picture or if The Grapes of Wrath deserved it more. Ryan McQuade, what is your verdict?
This is tough. This is so tough. I think, you've had me on the show before, and I've easily gone, I've gone one time against the Best Picture winner. I went with Pulp Fiction. And the other time I kept it with the Best Picture winner. So I've got to break my own personal tie here,
Yes.
being the third time. And can there be a tie for Best Picture? No, I'm just kidding. I won't do that. That's a cheat. I'm sorry. Look, I love The Grapes of Wrath. I think it is a phenomenal movie that we talked about a lot, and I loved our conversation, Kevin. And it makes me down the road want to watch it again, maybe in a world where it's a little bit lighter and we're better off. But for me, I cannot get over Rebecca. I think every time you've talked about it on this podcast, every time I've talked about it, mentioning the performances of the characters or Hitchcock or whatever it may be, I've undoubtedly had a smile on my face that entire time. And Kevin can't see me, so I have to tell him that. And so I ultimately, and it is by the slimmest of slimmest margins, would say that Rebecca deserved to win Best Picture, beating The Grapes of Wrath. And that is such a tough thing to say. It really is. And then also, that's not even including like The Great Dictator and The Philadelphia Story, like we talked about too, which are also very deserving of this top prize. But ultimately, I will keep it in the hands of director Hitchcock here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I understand you're wrestling with that because I certainly felt that way as well. But just in the course of this conversation, I do feel that Rebecca deserved it. And I think that they made the right call at the end of the day. And for history, just I think it holds up and will probably resonate more with people than The Grapes of Wrath has, which it still has and still will, as we talked about in that first segment, that it is sadly going to continue to be relevant. But Rebecca, on a filmmaking standpoint, I do think is just better in terms of delivering a satisfying cinematic experience with rich characters and a really well-written screenplay basis, and just some of the most memorable images on screen that I can remember. So I think Rebecca definitely deserved it, but it is very much a case of like, if Rebecca was not here, then I would be like hardcore stumping for The Grapes of Wrath and that it totally deserved it over this lineup. Well, maybe with The Great Dictator it would have been more of a discussion, but yeah, I think they made the right call here. Good job, Academy. Yay. I mean, it doesn't always happen, so
no,
we have to celebrate these minor victories.
Yeah. And it's also a good win for genre filmmaking too.
Yes.
And
like
we don't get we like you said, we just don't get enough of these movies. It's a great win, and I'm looking forward to seeing how hopefully Ben Wheatley doesn't screw this thing up.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we shall see. Fingers crossed, folks. I do encourage people to watch this version before you watch the remake.
Oh, please do. Please do.
That's what I will say.
Because this is, it's an ultimate classic. And then read the book, too. The book is phenomenal. Daphne du Maurier, one of the greatest writers of all time. It's fantastic.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for doing this epic deep dive into 1940. Always fun talking to you. I know you'll come with opinions, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kevin. It's always a thrill to be on here. I'm glad I got to be part of one of your last episodes. I'm such a huge fan of your show, and you're such a dear friend, and I appreciate you having me on for my ramblings again today.
Well, I appreciate it. You always do the homework, which I love. So thank you so much. Where can people find more from you on Twitter?
Well, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ryan McQuade 77. You can also find my work over at InSessionFilm.com, where I do the extra film show. We're going through the films of David Fincher leading up to Mank coming out later this year, hopefully. Fingers crossed. And I also do the show on there, the Oscar show Chasing the Gold, which Kevin has been a guest on. I've also got other writings still at awardcircuit.com and various other places over the next couple weeks that I'm excited about.
Yes. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you find podcasts. And if you want to hear even more nonsense about the Oscars, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup and become a patron. Listen to all kinds of fabulous bonus episodes with people like Ryan McQuade. And on that note, thank you again so much, Ryan, and I will bid you all adieu.